Welcome back to Comic Book School. My name is Buddy Scalera, and I'm the founder of Comic Book School. And at Comic Book School, we focus on the craft and business of making comics. And today we have a very special guest, a guest who has done the almost unimaginable, had a long career in comic books and a successful one at that. I think one of the things we're going to see tonight is true insights into what it takes to create comics, build a fan base, and then keep that fan base engaged. So let me read a bio of our guest. Brian Pulido's words and creations have been infecting the world of comics and beyond, creating a legacy of edgy characters and stories with a dark sensibility that has influenced pop culture and made underground imagery mainstream. His professional experience ranges from award-winning comic book publishing and writing to screenwriting, film producing, and directing, and large-scale pop culture event management. Brian Pulido is founder, publisher, and chief creative force behind Coffin Comics, the outlaw independent comics label that publishes the Coffinverse line of graphic novels, including Lady Death, La Muerta, Hell Witch, and other heavy metal-inspired supernatural comic books and merchandise. In the 90s, Pulido was the publisher of Chaos Comics, where he wrote and created Evil Ernie, Purgatory, and others. Additionally, he has published and or written A Nightmare on Elm Street, Chucky, Friday the 13th, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Megadeth, Halloween, Insane Clown Posse, WWE, and many more. He is on the Hero Initiatives fundraising board and has received the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund's Defender of Liberty Award and Comic-Con International's Inkpot Award for contributions to the comic arts. He also is the owner of Tucson Comic-Con in Tucson, Arizona, a lifelong comic book collector and enthusiast. Pulido has read Marvel's Captain America monthly without fail since July 1974. He resides in Phoenix, Arizona with his beloved wife Francesca and dogs Ember and Max. Comic Book School fans and aspiring creators and next generation of creators, please give a warm Comic Book School welcome to my friend Brian Pulido.
Buddy, how's it going? Geez, buddy, that's a nice biography. What the heck has that guy been up
to? I think you've been pretty busy, Brian. I mean, for all the years that I have known you, and that's 25 plus, you've always been busy.
Yeah, I'm like a shark, buddy. If the shark stops, he dies. So you got to keep going.
Brian, Coffin Comics. We always talk about you and know you as Chaos Comics. Briefly, what is Coffin Comics?
So Coffin Comics is a company that is a direct-to-customer driven company that produces comics and merchandise that has a rock and roll and supernatural feel. Full stop. And it is a carefully gloved way for me to just tell an entire universe worth of story in a world that we call the Coffinverse. So that's exactly what we are. And we're actually celebrating, believe it or not, our 14th year, but it is our 7th year of all new content. Our first new story was Lady Death Chaos Rules, and we launched that via Kickstarter in February of 2015.
Brian, we will be talking about making comics, marketing comics, connecting with an audience in Kickstarter tonight. But first, your journey. I think I first discovered you not knowing who you were when I bought Evil Ernie. I think that was Aircell about in 1864, I believe. And and I stayed with it and then really got to know you through Wizard. Just take us through your personal journey as a creator. And I think you had said that your journey started early when you were working at a comic shop, right?
Oh, boy. I mean, I've been involved with comics as a fan since pre-1974. I've worked for 2 comic shops. I worked for a guy named Jim Walsh in New Jersey in 1976, 1977. I actually did run the cash register at Golden Apple for one day. Completely confused me. Yeah, no, I've been loving comics, collecting comics for a very long time. And how my comic book career got started went kind of like this. See if I can do the short version. Now, I was working in the film business at the time, largely as what's called an assistant director, the person who manages the behind the scenes of a set for the director. And I was doing that on commercials and music videos in New York and in Los Angeles. And I actually was pretty good at it. So this job called assistant director I was pretty good at, but it really wasn't particularly creatively fulfilling. So I decided to put my degree to work, and I wrote a screenplay for a comic called, or for a movie called Evil Ernie. And very quickly, a friend of mine got this screenplay to the people who produced the movie Hellraiser. And they were very all hot and bothered about producing it, a guy named Christopher Webster. And they were all hot and bothered about it. And when they sent me a contract, so this is going back to 1988, when they sent me a contract, I read it. And what it said was I would get the opportunity to write this film and direct this film, but I would sacrifice all the rights. And, you know, that's probably a good way to go for some people. But for some reason, it just stuck in my craw. And as a penniless post-college student, I declined that offer. And instead I said, okay, well, how the heck can I bring this Evil Ernie to life? And so I said, let me just fall back on my first love, my hobby, comic books. So I began a journey that took close to 2 years to convert my screenplay into comic book form, then to locate an artist, which is a whole nother story that took well over a year. And then once finally connecting with the artist, Stephen Hughes, putting together what's called a package, especially back then, a package. And then I sent our package to publishers who I identified may want to publish this kind of material and let me retain the ownership. So got a lot of rejections, but also got some offers. And ultimately, I chose the least worst offer that allowed me to retain ownership. And that was with Malibu Graphics.
Malibu. Oh, I thought it was Aircell. No, you're right. Malibu.
Aircell is sort of like a contemporary company to those guys. And even Malibu had little imprints like Adventure and Eternity.
And then something called Image Comics at some point.
Exactly. Yeah. Image Comics came along. I mean, there's a lot more nuance to all those elements, but that at least is what got me a start in comics. And you break down every part of it, you know, finding the right artist. As a small example, when I was looking for an artist for Evil Ernie, I advertised in what was called the Comics Buyer's Guide at the time. I ran an ad for about a month, and then there was another place called Comic Career Newsletter. And I got about, I mean, the way my memory serves me, I got about 70 responses. And out of the 70 responses, I tried out about 11. And simultaneously being completely upfront, you know, best human being gets the job. And I'm looking at the quality of the work and the professionalism. Well, believe it or not, after having tried those 11 folks, no one prevailed. There was something or other, you know, it largely had to do with people not delivering the goods and their professionalism not being in place. So I literally gave up. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm just supposed to work in the film business. Okay. And then the next submission was from an inker who was inking an artist named Stephen Hughes. And I really don't know what let me know that underneath this kind of blotchy inks was a real talent with Hughes. But I felt that. So I lived in New Jersey at the time. Stephen lived in Boston. And I called up Hughes and I was like, hey, can you have me over? Because I'm going to drive right up to Boston and like, let's talk. And that's exactly what I did. And we talked and we really connected very, very powerfully, like at a chemical level, a love of a lot of the same sort of things, really interesting, contrasting backgrounds. And it led to a wonderful, very fruitful, very satisfying creative collaboration that lasted until Steve's untimely passing in February of 2000. So, man, that's a piece. And then that's just the start of it, buddy.
Well, your career has so many different facets, Brian, but at the core, you know, you're a writer and you're a writer's writer. Like you have a vision, you have a set of ideas and an aesthetic that you really love. Yeah. And we're going to dive into that real quick. But there is a little surprise and something that I did promise you, and Aaron, you're going to cue this up for me. I had shown you a photo and I said, if you join me, I'll show you a clip.
Oh, yeah.
From 1998. Aaron, are you able to roll that clip
Bring it
and
on.
show Brian his booth in 1998 at Wizard World Chicago?
It's our 5-year anniversary, so we're really excited. We're celebrating with our fans, and if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here for 5 years. So we had a big party last night, and we had an art auction, and all the proceeds went to the Literacy Volunteers of America, raised over $6,200, and we even auctioned off a box of Rice-A-Roni, which got $150. It was signed limited edition, one of one.
Now, if you had such a good time last year, can our fans expect to see you again next year?
Oh, you bet. Absolutely. We'll be here with bells on and a whole new booth. So we're going to have something twice as big and twice as crazy. So stay tuned.
You guys are great.
You're the best.
Thank you. Oh, you guys are awesome. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
That's awesome.
You know, I think one of the things that struck me even then, Brian, was the connection with your fans. And I think one of the things I've always noticed about you in your publishing career is that you never kept your fans at an arm's length. I mean, Francesca is your wife, so people know that was your wife. That you embraced your fan base. You had a party and your fans were there. That is so unlike most comic pros. Right? You don't have a party with your fans. You have a party with other pros, but you had a party and you invited the fans.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess, for me, I was always looking at rock and roll and how it, the stuff I love, heavy metal, classic rock, and just how everybody carries on. And, that intense connection you'd see in heavy metal and thrash metal. I actually don't know any other way. And there's no real plan or cynicism to it, buddy. It just seems to be that makes sense because these are the people I would hang out with. And I mean, to this day, we do have these types of events coming up next year in February. We have our own convention. It's called Sworn Fest, and people come in literally from around the world. And in a way, there's no separation between the creative people, and the people who enjoy our stuff. I mean, these are the people we'd hang out with anyway.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you mentioned heavy metal. I also love heavy metal, and I think I've mentioned this so many times to my group that they're probably tired of hearing this, but it does kind of relate to you. Lady Gaga was interviewed after an award show, and they said to Lady Gaga, "Do you want to be the next Madonna?" And Gaga said, "No, I want to be the next Iron Maiden."
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. That's the heavy metal aesthetic. You don't need to be on the radio. You don't need a lot of promotion. Heavy metal bands, like Iron Maiden, will sell out without an ad anywhere.
They don't care. Yeah. In fact, honestly, that is my model. So a lot of the stuff does look off the cuff, and in a way it is, but there is a lot of thinking behind it. And early on, I decided I do model our company and our activity and what we're about on other companies I admire. So Iron Maiden is a perfect example. That is now let's boil it down to its business essence. It's a vertically integrated company that controls its own destiny. Metallica, vertically integrated company that controls its own destiny, its own masters. Pearl Jam, Rush. These are companies that they're very particular. Certain group of people adore it. Even the Grateful Dead control their own masters. A lot of the artists that are very, very clever. And again, going back to Iron Maiden, what I adore about Maiden is they wear Iron Maiden shirts on stage. People say that's uncool. It's like, you're wrong. It's the coolest thing ever. They don't have any hits on the radio. It doesn't matter. They're Iron Maiden. And they transcend it. And that's, there's I think for the whole history, now I adore comics, right? But the business of comics is sort of colorful because there's a lot of folks all going in a certain direction at a given time. But I'm here to tell you that there's many ways to navigate the ocean. And you don't all have to go in one way. And it's always been my observation that giant prevailing trends it's just what everybody's seeing. But there's standalone island-like creators who've all controlled their own destiny. I mean, the obvious ones you could say like the Image guys, but let's look at Jeff Smith. Let's look at Eric Powell. Let's look at these are guys.
Terry Moore. He's the guy that just puts out his own books. And
perfect example. And those are folks I look to in our business as well. It's just wow. They're expressing what they have to express. It's coming from an authentic place, and people are willing to kind of rally around it. And they're very dedicated to their craft. They never give up, and they're always putting stuff out. So there's no reason to disengage.
Well, I think I remember reading this article in Rolling Stone when AC/DC was coming out with their latest album. And this little line struck me that AC/DC is in the rehearsal studio practicing. Now, my first awareness of AC/DC was around 1981
Yeah.
when Back in Black came out. But can you imagine that before a tour, they still rehearse, right? Because Angus is like, I want to get this right. People paid. This might be their only chance to see AC/DC.
Right.
Like they take their craft.
Yeah.
They don't just walk out there. They
No.
practice and they rehearse.
Same thing with Kiss. I mean, Kiss is rehearsing for months for these shows. I mean, you know, if they're going to be that great for that period of time, they know they got to do the homework, you know, and I feel literally the exact way. And I actually, you know, most people in entertainment, I wouldn't want to diminish anybody because, you know, to win that tournament and stay relevant and stay on top of the game, you have to put the work in. There's really no way around it.
There is no way around it. And one of the things that I think is really notable about your career, Brian, is that you have carved out a niche and a brand. Now, you might love Hallmark movies, and this may be your secret passion. But when you publish, people know what they're going to get from Coffin Comics and Brian Pulido. They know your brand, and your brand is very strong. Talk to me about the importance of creators nurturing and maintaining a consistent brand.
Well, yeah, I guess there's a lot of pieces to that. So to my understanding, generally, people enjoy entertainment in a genre, and people enjoy creations from people inside a given genre. So, for example, obvious example, Stephen King. Mm-hmm. Stephen King is mostly known for horror and supernatural. He does venture out to stuff like telling baseball stories and maybe a mystery or two. But when you think of Stephen King, you think horror. When you think of, let's say, in our world, Frank Miller, you think crime, you think noir, perhaps some superhero. Let's say Mark Waid, I think of like great, solid, optimistic superhero stuff.
Right.
And that's how people kind of want to see you. So I don't mind that at all. I like what I happen to do. I think it's sort of a blending of 70s Marvel superheroes, horror movies, metal movies, and pro wrestling. And that's where it comes from for me. And so I think one piece of it is people like to consume stuff from creators in a certain way. People do break that mold. But another example would be this guy, the author Lee Child. He writes the Jack Reacher stories. Mm-hmm. He wrote like 25 of them. He's happy. People could expect that. It's not like his next one's going to be a rom-com. It's within an expectation. So a piece of branding might be setting an expectation. You know, another thing might be simply something simple as color choice. And in our case, I mean, I've been associated with the colors black, white, red since the very beginning. I just adore that palette. And I think I got that from watching Kiss. I mean, Kiss is more like black, white, silver. And during the 80s, they added some color, which I think was a misadventure. But
and bandanas.
Bandanas, all that stuff. So that'd be another piece. And then given that we do have a certain brand, we actually choose every font that's associated with our advertising. Like, for example, every season we may change up a font where we're going to have a headline font, a sub-headline font, a body copy font to complement a given property, but it's got to be on the brand. So everything all of our activities stem from a brand. So it's not as if we start out with heavy metal inspired stuff and then next week we are now like the Polyphonic Spree, and then the week after we are Mumford and Sons. I mean, it's all that's great, but that's, you know, we're in a certain lane and we like it. And so branding is actually like it's a longer conversation, but what the principle there is that it's something that's easily identifiable almost instantaneously for a customer. And it communicates what you're about almost instantly. Like, again, you know, Nike. You know, many years ago, it would be Nike sneakers. Then it was Nike. And now you think swoosh. And it brings up other images, things like a sleek, athletic, top of the game, that kind of stuff. So branding's a longer conversation, but I think anyone could intrinsically be a brand. I mean, as another example that's not like our own example is I look at the fine artist Tara McPherson. She's this cool lowbrow artist, and she does these cool beautiful paintings of sad girls with like holes in their heart. And it's at once melancholy and cartoonish. And I could show you 100 pieces of Tara McPherson art and you know it's her. And then if you look at a picture of Tara McPherson, it's like, oh, it only makes sense that this person does this art. So, I mean, branding's, boy, it's just the tip of the iceberg talking about that topic.
You know, I want to bring you back to brand and Nike. Someone at a marketing conference at some point had said, you know, Nike is a true brand. If Nike said that they were going to open the Nike Hotel in Lower Manhattan, you might be able to imagine what that would be. But if they said that the Marriott was going to put out a sneaker line, you wouldn't know what the heck what to expect.
Okay.
So I think that, like Brian Pulido saying, I'm starting a new publishing line, I think people had more or less an idea of what you would make. And if you said we're doing merch, they would know what you were talking about, right? They would be like, that's it.
Right.
Merch.
We're doing pint glasses, shot glasses. It's exactly what you'd expect. Like, our whole thing is like, you know, work like a captain and party like a pirate.
I like it. I like it. Well, I'm going to take us into the main part of the discussion. You know what? You've worked with publishers, you've self-published. What would you say is the difference, and what should our next generation of creators know about the difference between working with a publisher and self-publishing?
Well, and then there are differences, and then there's nuances. So you could be a creative person and do what's called work made for hire. So that's where you're largely working on a collective work that the company itself owns. And a lot of great creators get their start doing that. You could name 100. And within those companies, on occasion, one is able to, after they achieve a certain degree of visibility and notoriety, or perhaps they're highly acclaimed, they could then do what's called creator owned or cooperatively owned between the company and themselves. So that's two broad strokes. And it's easier yet hard, I think, to work for a publisher. For a period of time in the OOs, I was simply writing scripts and giving them to a publisher, and then that was the end of my relationship. And it made for an easier day, I must admit to you, but it didn't feel immersive enough. And I really realized for me that I just have to be all over everything. The marketing decisions, font, artist, working with the artist, you know, the long days and long nights, just it is more creatively satisfying and fulfilling for me, as opposed to just dashing off a script and then I see it come out at some time in the future. So for the newer talent, obviously this is a tournament-based career and not everybody wins. And for every 1,000 properties that are put out, maybe 10 or 15 really connect with the public. But, you know, let's look at a career of a guy like Donnie Cates. Mm-hmm. He was doing some obscure stuff, and then he did a great series, image called God Country. And I think that just lit him up to Marvel in particular. And it just so happened that his own interests dovetailed with Marvel. I think he loved Thanos, he loved Thor and all the cosmic stuff. So his popularity rose. He got swept up and moved into Marvel. That rose his visibility up tremendously, and that allowed him to jump back into image to do stuff like he's doing now, crossover with a real high visibility. Mm-hmm. But let's be honest, it's a tournament, and for one Donnie Cates, there's 500 not Donnie Cates. So I don't know if I've answered that question. I was a little winding around, but the differences are probably have to do a lot with how much of an investment, or are you just a pure writer, which is completely valid. You know, you got your Brian Michael Bendis and any of these incredible writers who could just bust out 4 to 6 monthlies. Or do you want a more immersive experience? And if you want to have a more immersive experience, perhaps being a self-publisher is more for you.
You know, you saying tournament dovetails into what I think is important for our aspiring next generation creators. Is it is really competitive out there.
Unbelievably competitive. You actually have no idea. It's everything. I mean, and this is a somber element of this evening, is to let everyone know that the competition for attention in any form of entertainment is high. And you could imagine, for example, let's look at another arena. You know, if you want to be a director of motion pictures, can you imagine the competition to just, first of all, you have to have the innate talent, and then there has to be the opportunity and the connecting of those things. But it is absolutely true of comics. And to stand the test of time in comics it's borderline miraculous, because the competition is fierce. They're hungry people. They're enormously talented people. And a lot of people want to do what we do, just a lot. I mean, a lot more than their jobs. So yeah, how that crystallized for me was I read a book called Freakonomics. In a particular chapter, Freakonomics discussed the drug dealing trade. And what they said was they were looking at the drug dealing trade, which I do not advocate, but they were looking at it from a sociological point of view, from the point of view of the dealer on the street, and then measured his or her life up against the person who was at the top of the pile, who made all the money and who had essentially won the tournament. And what Freakonomics said was that downward pressure made it statistically highly improbable for success. Now, saying all that, I'm not trying to dissuade people, but I think it's a good to know what the baseline is. And the baseline is a fiercely competitive environment where the uniquely talented folks with unique vision and persistence do win.
What's the importance of network?
It's invaluable. None of this is done in a vacuum, and network is key, and relationship is key. I'll give you a small example. It just so happens that I started going to comic book conventions in around the summer of 1990 in Southern California. And I was going to every con that I could. And it was simply just being on the scene where I got to meet folks who are peers or contemporaries, whether it be Jimmy Palmiotti, Joe Quesada, Mark Texiera, people I just sort of organically developed a relationship with. And we've all gone on to do our various things. We're in touch to various degrees, but that's sort of like the click. And then from there, we constantly expand out. And again, no cynicism to it, quite natural, in fact. At a convention, you might just so happen to be in line. I mean, an odd example was I was in line just to get into San Diego Comic-Con like everybody else. I struck up with a conversation with a guy who's dressed like a wizard, and he was the guy who was the creator of the TV show, The Wizards of Waverly Coast, you know, which is a giant Disney show. So
Right.
you just never predict if you're on the scene and in the game. You can't possibly predict who you're going to meet and where you're going to have these meaningful relationships. And I'd also say that probably got the most meaningful relationships I have in comics during the social part of the night. You know, it's like afterwards having a beer. I don't know what it is. And, you know, I will tell you too, I appear to be very outgoing, and I have an element of personality, which is that. But also I'm like everybody else in comics, a little shy, a little reluctant. And so to go out there on those initial parties, and full disclosure, if I don't know a lot of people in a room, I find it intimidating. You know, if it's my room and my people, I'm fine. But I guess I'm like everybody else. However, I have realized through the years that, you know, you got to be in it to win it. So yeah, being in that game, and, you know, in all of our formative years in our career in the 90s, when we're all just like hanging out, going to Dick's Last Resort, getting loaded with Nelson and hanging out with everybody. I mean, those are friendships that were made for life. And it's kind of fun. I remember I'll go to a show, let's say Emerald City Comic Con. You know, I know everyone I know and hanging out with everyone I'm hanging out. But I know kind of walking back to my hotel room, and I'll see a bar. And then I just see like that next generation, everybody, you know, all the kids with like the tight pants and the brown shoes, and, you know, like just that the hipsters, whoever, just sort of doing what people do, you know, exchanging ideas, getting all fired up, and, you know, plotting the takeover of the universe, and someone will do it.
I am constantly dismayed, Brian, at how people miss good opportunities, though. You know, networking is one thing, follow-up is something else. You were always very good at follow-up. If you said you were going to do something, even verbally at a show to me, You remembered and got that to me. Talk about the importance of organization and follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, if you took away the comic book creator element of my personality, you'd be caught with like a project manager, office manager. I hold a couple of things really dear, and one is my word. And I attempt the words that I speak and the promises that I make. I really do my very best to live by them. So I got to be careful about what I commit to. And if I cannot make that, if some circumstance changes things, I might make a repromise. But yeah, like in our relationship or others, if I say it, I really want to be it. And I want to be accountable for people. And I'm not putting myself out there like I've been perfect. And particularly in younger parts of my life, it's harder to kind of really nail that. But I really kind of realized that I want people to know if I say something, generally you could count on it. Like even in our setting up for this, it's like, we agreed on a time a week ago and we haven't spoke since, but of course we're both there. It's like, it's not a question. Yeah. So the word is the bond. It's old school, but yeah, I feel pretty strongly about that stuff. And I like to surround myself and employ people who are similar, that relationship to the words that come out of their mouth are critical.
So talk to me a little bit about, you've done a lot of experimenting over the years, from different types of publishing to marketing experiments, merchandising. You've had this constant rubbing shoulders with Hollywood. What would you say worked and what didn't work?
That's a very broad question, but there's a lot of failure involved with all this stuff, and it's easy to see the successes. As I'm older now, I'm much more comfortable with the various failures. We kind of learn to accept them a lot quicker and not be defined by them, and kind of realize that, in my very primitive way of learning through trial and error, it's the only way it could go. Initially in my first publishing company, Chaos, I think we got like the marketing and selling right. At the time, what we did not get right was the real day-to-day business and handling of money and finance. And it became very clear to me, particularly towards the end, because our company actually wound up having a business bankruptcy, that was something that was really lacking. And so I chose then to really put a lot more attention on that and learn more. And in fact, I put myself through business school to understand it because it was lacking. I did. There is a business philosophy called eMyth and the eMyth Manager, and they actually have an academy. And I put myself through 2 years straight of the academy while working full time so that I could actually learn finance and understand how to relate to it and to overcome that. So I would say that probably the greatest failure is that financial mismanagement and strategic mismanagement. And while particularly at the time, it sucked and it was a really hard time, I got past it by accepting my responsibility in it and then learning things from it. Some of the other, my relationship to Hollywood and the various things being in development through the years and the successes and failures there, it's really fascinating because I feel as if it's an ongoing process, and I learn, it's still an enigma to me, but there is something I appear to learn a little bit more every time. So it's not like I've chosen to go like full hog, full time into that arena. And however, as a part-time hobby, I've learned a lot, and it's a very baffling, different world. There's the overnight successes of the Garth Entices, who in reality had Preacher in development for over 10 years. The Boys was a shorter development time for those guys, and I'm very happy for them, him and Derek Robinson especially. But it's a really fascinating and different world, and I consider probably about like 50-50 success failure on that one. We raised money, and I got to direct the film called The Graves. Itself wasn't War and Peace, but the experience was the experience of a lifetime. And we actually did get to sell that movie, and we were on 52 screens. We were on part of the 8 Films to Die For. We were on Sci-Fi Channel, et cetera, et cetera. But even within the nuance of that, the selling of a motion picture from the outside of that industry was incredibly instructive. And I've had experience on the development end where things are optioned and what that's like. And it's baffling, very interesting, but I'm very grateful that not only do I have really good representation, but I have a couple of pals on my speed dial that really can give me the straight dope when I need it about what's going on in that universe. Like, people are much more in it than I am.
All right. So give me this, give my community of next generation creators some insight and advice about what they should know about breaking in right now. And you can take it from a macro, or you can take it from for writers, for artists, however you want to unpack it.
I think the first thing I would say that seems to stand the test of time, and is unlike how I broke in, is that you got to do the work. So get yourself educated. And if you're a writer, keep writing. If you're a penciler, inker, letterer, colorist, develop your craft. And then the first thing I'd recommend is self-publish something so that people can get a physical. So that even if you're lucky enough to meet an editor or get into a formal submissions circumstance, you have something tangible to give people. The reason I say that is, if you're a writer, to blind submit a piece of written material and have an expectation that a poor submissions editor is going to read that, it's difficult. Yeah. It's hard. I've seen it. I literally, many years ago, a guy named Greg Wright was a Marvel editor. Yeah. And he was kind enough to have me up to the offices, and I was submitting something, sort of blind submission. And he had two piles. I think he had this pile and he had this pile. And he put my thing on this pile, the lower pile. And this lower pile was his pals. And this pile was blind submission. Now, over the course of 2 hours where he was educating me, this pile got up to about here. And I learned my lesson. So it's very hard for writers to get read. So how it's easier for a writer to get read is to team up with some artists and make a comic, and then hand that comic out or begin selling that comic at conventions or even locally. I have witnessed people here in our Phoenix area become successful doing that. I mean, I could count on my hands 3 or 4 guys from the Southwest here who started out doing local zines and passing out their books, and now they work for major companies, as creatives. So I've seen that. So that'd be like my number one. I don't think as a writer you should do blind submissions of just written material. It's just hard. And again, kind of getting out into the mix. I think it's very difficult to like be in your basement, develop. I guess, well, let me take that back. If you're a great penciler and you're in a basement and you have no contact and you do a blind submission to a major company, if that company happens to open up the piece and you're good, and they give you a short job as a tryout, and you nail it, you're off to the races. It's just the real currency of comic books are pencilers who can tell a story well with panache and style. That's the exception to the rule. I think maybe that could also be said perhaps of colorists, because it's so easy to see. Everybody else, it's a little more difficult, for reasons I aforementioned. Reasons. So that'd be my start. And that, I mean, honestly, even before that, so what I'd recommend to any kind of creative talent is to take a real good cold look at yourself and see what areas you need to improve, and to be realistic about whether you're producing professional enough material to begin submitting. Yeah. And not to delude yourself. So for example, if you can't draw a hand, maybe spend 6 months drawing hands. And I'll tell you why I make that recommendation. When I was a kid in the late 70s, I was a very average competitive skateboarder. I had a ramp in my backyard, the vertical ramp and all that kind of stuff. And unbeknownst to me, and let me back up a minute. The way people skate is either front side, which is usually facing the surface, or backside, where your back is facing the surface. And I spent a lot of time unconsciously developing my skating ability front side. But to be a real competitive skater, you have to be able to do all your tricks front and backside. So I plateaued. I was like 2 or 3 years into a competitive career, but I had areas where I simply didn't develop. And so I actually had to stop what I was doing, drop competition, and go spend 9 months getting all caught up because I hadn't developed that weakness. So that was very instructive for me moving forward in my life, because I said, when I get into something, I got to understand it 3-dimensionally, and I have to develop my aptitude across the board. I can't, for example, if I was an artist, like always have hiding people's hands or not dealing with perspective. You have to be really three-dimensionally talented in this field. You know, when you pick your chosen genre, you gotta be ready for what a company could throw at you. So those are the two main things. Make sure you're really developed, be realistic, maybe have someone in your life who could be give you constructive criticism and develop
honest with you that maybe I think American Idol is one of the things that really turned talent around. Not only did it discover great talent, but I think Simon Cowell being honest with people like, you're good, but not good enough,
right,
is sometimes the indicator that either you want it badly enough that you'll keep practicing, or maybe you're just never going to be good enough to be the Tony Hawk that you want to be. And maybe you could be the Brian Pulido of comics.
Exactly. Yeah. And so maybe another piece of that is being willing to develop a thick skin, or not to defend something, to really try to take in what people are giving you and really try it on.
Well, I want to transition into some part of the show that is a little bit controversial, Brian.
Okay.
Kickstarter.
Okay.
So I will lead off by saying I am a fan of Kickstarter for certain creators and or projects, but I think that Kickstarter can actually harm your career if you are a writer or a creator that is not quite ready and you go out looking for money and either don't complete or deliver something of substandard, and you'll never get those people to come back 2 times. However, as an aspiring set of creators, people think a lot about getting their funding. And when I brought up that I was going to be bringing you on the show, and Aaron, if you want to show a couple of pages from Brian's Kickstarter or from the website, that's cool as well. We were really thinking like, wow, I mean, Brian knows how to run Kickstarter, but I do want to say that I'm, like I said, not a fan for everybody.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, to give a background for folks, I've run 22 or 23 Kickstarter campaigns. Our most recent Lady Death Kickstarter campaign did a capital raise of $426,000. So it's extraordinary. We feel blessed. Trust me. That's a lot of money. Look at that. That's 2,668 backers. Yeah, and that one was from, let's see. Well, that one's about a year old. But so I hear what you're saying, and I would like to address it in 2 ways. So I think Kickstarter could still be valid for a starting out creator, but Kickstarter is ultimately gonna, if one were to take on you a Kickstarter, you have to, the creator or your team, you have to begin creating a community. You actually have to have potential backers. Now, the exciting thing about Kickstarter is it is its own community, but you need to have a community, and then you bring it together with the Kickstarter community, and it could create something phenomenal. But if you're starting out and you don't deliver the goods, for example, you start a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo and you say you're going to deliver the goods by December of the year, and you don't, that's very bad, and it's very difficult to recover from. People, you know, a lot of people do default on their crowdfundings, and backers just don't like it, and they're unforgiving, and that makes complete sense to me. However, what I would say is, if you and your team are making a nice looking professional project and you're already getting going, and really what you need is funding, I would do it. And then I would start by asking friends and family. And I mean, honestly, there comes a point where when you're doing a crowdfunding campaign, please understand the word campaign. Go look it up in the dictionary. It's a series of actions. It's not static. I mean, you got to get kind of outside of yourself and start asking people. Like, I do remember, tangential but relevant to the conversation, when we were raising money to make a feature film, we were asking qualified investors, but I got in such a habit of asking people straight-faced for money. I actually was at the checkout counter of the local grocery store, and I would say to the checkout counter, do you happen to know anyone that's an accredited investor that would invest in a movie? Like, I did 600 or 700 or 800 asks to ultimately get a pool of about 15 qualified investors. And after a while, I was just on fire. So if you're starting out, be realistic about what you can and you can't do. Try to manage your word, team up with some folks to bring your comic to life, and then do what most people do. Ask your friends, ask your family, then ask your friends and your family to share and to share and to share. Now, one thing that could prepare you for a Kickstarter, like let's say if I was starting all over again from scratch, this is what I would do. First thing, so it's late April 2021. I'm going to do my first Kickstarter 1 year from now. First thing I do is I sign up to the app MailChimp and I start a mailing list. So now I have a mailing list and I'm going to have a simple website and I'm going to post every day about the progress of a project that I'm going to declare. I'm going to do Ball of Thread Lad 1 year from now. So I'm beginning my journey. I will do at the very minimum one post a day. In my doing my posts, every time I'm going to ask people to join my mailing list. And by the time that year's over, people are going to see all my trials, all my triumphs, all my challenges in bringing Ball of Thread Lad to life. And they're going to see a piece of themselves in that experience, that journey. They're going to be somewhere on that journey with you, right along with you. They're going to relate to it. And then I'm going to launch that Kickstarter in April of 2022, my lifelong ambition, Ball of Thread Lad. And by that time, I'm going to have 300 or 400 people on my mailing list because I've kept them interested and entertained by doing daily posts. I've shared myself, my ups, my downs, my progress on the work itself. And in fact, when I launch my Kickstarter or Indiegogo, most of the project's done. Now I have a writer. Now I have an artist. I have a letter. I have a team helping me out. And you know what? I've shared their names. I've shared their part of the journey. And now it's like, holy mackerel, everybody's on board. So now I'm going to launch. And out of those 300 backers, 35, 40, 50 people are going to adopt this project. And that might cause a little something in the algorithm on Kickstarter that makes it go up a little bit. And then I'm going to ask those people, I'm going to go out of my comfort zone. And I'm going to say, everyone who's backed my campaign, can you please do me a big favor? Could you please share my campaign? And if by sharing, what that sounds like to you is like just do a little share on social media, I'm up for that. But if you want to really get to the heart of the matter, this is what I'm asking. Pick up the phone to a friend or foe and tell them a little bit about my project and ask them to back it today. So, and then I repeat that for the rest of my career for 30 years. That's what I would do.
Sounds very straightforward and easy, Brian.
Yeah, you just have to face, I mean, here's the thing too, buddy. I think you'd appreciate that. Maybe 30 years ago, I didn't have that much of an easy relationship to all those types of challenges because I get it. Because the people who are listening here, they're at a different part of their journey. They might be afraid to ask people for things. They may not realize that the world is an enormously abundant place and that showers of riches are falling all over the place. And it's just up to you to declare it. They may not see the world that way. I happen to see the world that way. And as a consequence, there is a reward. But I'm letting you guys and gals know out there, truly, if you ask for something or make a request of others, the only thing that people can do is either accept or decline. And if you repeat it, 500 to 800 times, things start going your way. So yeah, I realize too, for folks starting out, that there's a lot of personal barriers that we put in place ourselves that one has to get past. I'm shy. I can't do that. I'm not a salesperson. I can't ask for what I want, but I'm here to let you know you actually have to.
I think getting past our own inertia is really hard. And people have to say like, okay, in order to start this, I have to start this. And what I see in a lot of cases is failure to start. Our community published an anthology last year, Brian, and everybody contributed an 8-page story and they got it done. And they realized that A, 8 pages is harder than you think.
Yeah.
And B, you can do it. but you're going to have to stick with it. It's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Yeah. And I mean, a thing I would encourage everybody to think of is, why are you doing it? For me, buddy, it really is about the work, because every day I have to stare at a computer screen and I have to do the work, and I really have to enjoy it. Like, me going out to conventions and being adored is a phenomenal benefit. But if you really don't like doing the work, you got to consider what it is you're doing. I just so happen to be pretty fired up 30 years into the game to light the computer up and to work on whatever it is that I have to work on next. And you just have to like the work, because at the end of the day, the awards, the allocates, the attaboys aren't going to win the day. What's going to win the day is the work.
Well, if I don't let the community ask you ask the questions that they've posted in advance to the message board, they'll be coming after us with pitchforks. So I'm going to ask.
I'd love to. Yeah, I keep looking over here and I'm like, I want to answer these questions.
So Aaron, would you join us on the screen here and help us? So this is Dee Alley. She's the editor of Comic Book School, one of our 2 editors, and also a very talented writer animator. So Dee, can you just hit Brian with one of the first questions that you think is good from our message boards?
Okay, I just put them in order of the way they were asked. So first come, first serve. The first question is, what trends do you see coming crowdfunding, and any changes ahead for crowdfunding that you can see, from Mr. Andersin?
Hey, Mr. Andersin. So the first thing is, I really don't know what the trends are. And I don't know what's coming at all. And I am not a person who, and I don't know if you're asking from a mechanical point of view in terms of, I mean, maybe Kickstarter gets tired of doing it and shuts down. I don't know. I really don't know that. But I would tell you this, and I don't know if this exactly answers your question, but I don't believe in following any kind of trend, and I don't check anything. And all I do is what I like to do. I never guess the market. Every time I've ever tried to guess the market, by the time I got to market, it was over. So I really believe strongly as an artist that you got to come from a philosophy. And my philosophy is do what's authentic to you, whatever that is. I mean, if you want to do comics about furries, or it doesn't matter to me, as long as it comes from an authentic place. And I believe that stands the test of time. And that does go back to the Iron Maiden analogy. It's like, no matter what's in or out of fashion, Iron Maiden stands the test of time. So I hope that answers your question. But yeah, I am blissfully unaware and somewhat uninterested on, all the trends and the mechanisms. I decided in 2002 distinctly not to keep an eye on any of the business mechanics, and it's just made my life 100% better.
Seriously,
and it's never hurt my career at all.
I think he mentioned also kind of what kind of things that you would put out, what backers want. Do you tailor anything to kind of what your fans are asking for?
Yes and no. So it's got to pass my own personal test of what I think is cool, and then I do respond. I mean, as the craziest example, years ago we homaged My Little Pony with a character named Pony Death. And you would think that our fan base would hate it, but I got to tell you, they love it. And that was, I did it because I was resistant, but I was at a Hot Topic, and this guy came out of the dressing room. And this guy was like a 6'3" Viking metal looking guy. Like the guy would like this Viking metal band, Amon Amarth. And this guy was wearing a My Little Pony dress. And I'm like, okay, I'm doing it, man. And then we put out this fun little, My Little Pony Death, who actually, I'm here to tell you, is now an actual character in our universe. We put out some Pony Death imagery, and I was in Las Vegas of all places, and a Hell's Angel bought 12 copies of the print to give to all the kids in his family. So yeah, on occasion I'll do tailor. It's always got to pass the cool test for me. So a small example, like we might homage or associate the character Lady Death with stuff that we think is cool. And it's not that we don't think that sports are cool, but we're just not going to put Lady Death in a sports uniform or associate with sports, because she doesn't even know what sports are. So try to keep the smell test kind of accurate. So, but I feel lucky that our fans like what we do, but I don't foresee tailoring things. It's not what I got into it for. This isn't to say that, like I'm going to put out stuff that is not potentially successful to our fan base, but I'm a storyteller and I just got to tell the stories that I got to tell. And I feel blessed that folks want to come for the ride so far.
Cool. Nice. All right. The next question is from Mike, and this is a little long, so let me get through it. If it shows. What are your thoughts on having an entire issue of a comic already completed prior to beginning the Kickstarter campaign versus waiting until after the campaign is fully funded? And the second part of that is some creative teams are looking for capital to pay members, but if the work is done beforehand, is there an advantage to that approach?
So when I chose to get into the crowdfunding game, I was watching the mayor of comic books, Jimmy Palmiotti, doing his own Kickstarters. Anyone who's anyone looks up to Jimmy. He's the mayor. That's it. Full stop. That's the guy. And I was noticing he was putting out whatever he wanted. He was doing this comic about some gal with crab hands, and I was loving it because he was getting funded. I thought it was miraculous. So I called up Jimmy. And I was like, I posed the exact question you're posing. And his answer was really simple. He was like, yeah, have it all done ahead of time. And so I just took that verbatim. And that cost some, for our first ever campaign, or first year of campaigning, we put out 4 campaigns that were 200 fully produced, 250 newly produced pages. And our household funded it. And it wasn't easy. But the calculation was if we could have our campaign and we could deliver on our finished goods within about 8 to 10 weeks of our completion, we could begin to build some momentum and some trust with our backers. And I believe that's what we did, 22, 23 campaigns. People could reasonably count on us. We start a campaign within 10, 12 weeks, you're getting your stuff, and then we're doing another campaign. Now, I think conversely, I understand where some people are at in terms of their team needs to be paid and all that kind of stuff. What I would say to the lead creator is work an extra job and get the money and pay the people. Like what I did when I began my career is Evil Ernie, Lady Death, those characters were always work made for hire. And I paid all the artists who were involved. And I was a penniless post-college student. I just worked extra jobs. And they got paid and I didn't get paid. So, I mean, on Evil Ernie, I didn't get paid for 3 or 4 years. I just paid the team. But it turned out. So that's my answer to that. And I believe that one like crazy. Have it ready to fund, to create momentum and trust.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
The next question was from A.A. Rubin. To what extent do you believe the crowdfunding model is sustainable? Do you ever fear oversaturation or a bubble?
So let me address paranoia. I'm always paranoid about everything. Are you kidding me? I'm an entrepreneur, a multiple business owner for 30 years in the game. I worry about everything every hour of the day. And I temper that with going after everything every hour of the day. So, yeah, I mean, I have a natural paranoia, that shark-like thing that always is concerned about everything. But it's not, it doesn't stop me. So do I have a concern about a general bubble in comics and all that? I mean, I always do because I've been through a bubble. So, I mean, do I wake up every day and wonder, like right now, comics are really popular and the collectability comics are nutty. It's crazy. It just always continues to surprise me, and do I worry that it could change? Of course I worry that it could change. But I could do no more than worry and be prepared for if it does change. Does Coffin Comics have a plan B, C, D in the case of like anything happening, anything from a flood to economic downturns? Yeah, but it's not going to stop me from doing what I got to do.
Okay. The next question might be a little bit of a repeat from the first one, but A.A. Rubin was also asking, which types of rewards seem to be the most or least successful?
So I guess for comic book Kickstarters, what people really like is that nice entry-level basic edition that's as inexpensive as you could make it while still covering your costs and maybe making a couple shekels to apply to the next campaign. And in our case, we call that our Premier Edition. So in our case, again, for crowdfunding, we do a little longer story, but I've seen people do comic books that are 24, 36, 32 pages. We do 48 pages or above, nice little square bound, full color, all those crazy free bonus items that we like to add. We charge about $26 for that, and we include free US shipping. And that seems to be a fair entry level thing. We also do a digital reward, that same book digitally for $6. And then in our case, to address the collectible element, we do a lot of shenanigans. Like I've done crazy cover enhancements since the beginning of my career. Everything from velvet, leather, chromium, glow in the dark, coffin shape. And to this day, I adore that stuff. So we've done we finally did literally coffin shape, metal comic books, jewel enhanced comic books, holofoil, prismafoil, fleck foil, pearl linen. I just like doing it. So metal jewel. Now that doesn't work for everybody. And, but I think a lot of trial and error really helps guide your path. I remember in our first campaign in 2015, we ultimately did a raise of $76,000, had like 5 or 6 editions. And now our campaigns, let's say on the character Lady Death, they're pretty bold. We let people know that we're putting a ton of stuff out at one time. So that might be the main edition of the story, trades, art books, t-shirts. It's lunacy. Now, I don't suggest you do that. I believe that you might start modestly and with some trial and error. So going back to the ball of thread lad analogy, a year from now, I might do the main edition of Ball of Thread Lad. And then maybe I'll do a couple of interesting limited variant editions. So actual ball of thread popped on that cover, glow in the dark thread. Maybe I'll do some prints. Maybe I'll do some cards and see if the market responds. So, I mean, it's kind of fun because you get that pretty quick feedback. You put out stuff and you can see, is it successful? Is it not? Like we introduced fine art prints a couple of years ago, like super high-end cliche, and people respond. So we could do them. And then last year we introduced doing 24 by 36 posters. Remember, those used to be all over the place. So they're successful enough that we keep doing them. So we'll trial and error.
Okay. And this one was for me. I was looking over, like I said, all of the things that you've done. And I was wondering, how do you keep building on the same character like Lady Death or some of the others that you have over time? What entices you to keep returning to that same character?
That's a very good question. I am so Lady Death in this new era. I've put out 150 Lady Death stories or plus, and I am so behind in the stories I want to present to people. I literally have 6 or 7 years of plot that I just have to. I'm going to get to as we continue to unfold it. So I'm just pretty fired up that particular character is a way that I could express myself on issues that interest and baffle me. So it's probably the main thrust of the Lady Death story is about persistence in incessantly overcoming incalculable odds. And it's also a bit of a rumination on death itself. Death is very, very baffling. And one of my crazier theories is I believe that all comic books are about the creative personnel behind comic books contending with the fear of death. So we have so many characters that die and come back and die and come back. We all kind of want to have some small measure of control. So I like dealing with this particular character, Lady Death, who has some measure of control over her own mortality. And that no matter what is thrown at her, metaphorically and literally, she'll overcome. So I guess I'm just fired up. Now, in terms of character creation, I use a technique. It's pretty simple. It's called clustering. So what I might do at any given time, I have a couple of notebooks here and there, and I'm taking notes. And I'm taking notes on what attracts me. So that might be a word. It might have been a piece of a movie. It might even be a feeling. It might be a theme. And then I start taking these notes. And I'll start going after those things. I could bring you back to the one character we have called La Muerto. So La Muerta is a street-level crime story, and it's a revenge-driven story. So I knew when I invented her in around late 2011, I knew I wanted to do a classic revenge story. It was bothering me that these Taken movies missed the component where the the person who is the victim goes to the police or the authority to try to get help, and then they're turned down. And that was right in there in the original Death Wish. For some reason, I just felt it was a missing component of that story. So I knew I wanted to do classic. So I actually read books on revenge. I dismantled and put together about 10 or 15 revenge movies, and I laid out a plan. So I'm walking around knowing intellectually I want to do a revenge story. And it just so happened that I was in Tucson, Arizona in around November of that year, and I witnessed a thing called the All Souls Procession, which is for Mexican Americans, it is their celebration of Day of the Dead. And as opposed to a somber ceremony, it's actually a celebration of life and a rumination on those who passed. And it just smacked me in the face. I'm like, wow, I have not seen this world presented. What can this world teach me? So I began a process of research, and it just seemed like I could put these two components together. Now, I also knew from my cluster that I adore the work The Crow by James O'Barr. And a lot of people out there, they're all about The Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns. And they're okay, guys. But I got to tell you, The Crow is my The Watchmen. So this notion of, they call it the seraphim angel, and that revenge story, that element where, is Eric Draven alive or dead? I've always been fascinated with that. So these were some of the melange that was going through my mind, where I'm walking around wanting to do a revenge story. I saw this beautiful milieu, Mexican-American culture, and then Seraphim Angel. And that was kind of enough to say, okay, I got it. So yeah, I might take my clustering and then I say, what genre does that seem to be occurring in? Because then it becomes really practical. There's only, how many stories are there really, in a sense? There's a certain amount of stories. They occur in a genre. They have an up ending. They have a down ending. They have an ambiguous ending. It's like, okay, pick a genre. What's it like? And then start working from there. So hopefully that helps.
That's great, Brian.
Yeah, very much so. Okay, so there was only one other question. This one actually came from our chat. So this was from a guy named Brian Manuel. When navigating the ocean, as we mentioned earlier, are there any key things that people just getting into comics should look out for in the waters of said ocean? And any tips on navigating those?
Yeah, I'd say this is going to sound pretty trippy, but I believe that in anything that you choose to endeavor in the world, you really want to get your philosophy on it straight. So try to sort out your reasons. I have had a burning desire to tell stories since I was a child. And so I knew that my life had to facilitate that somehow. And what was going to be the chosen entertainment arena with the least amount of resistance? And for me, it wound up being comics. The reason why I say the least amount of resistance is I'm great at being a master of my own domain. But man, I mean, in terms of playing well with others, I don't have a lot of facility in that. So I had to pick something, which is kind of odd considering I worked in the film business for a long time. And that's its own particular team-based creation is its own thing. But man, it's so much fun to wake up in the morning with a smaller team and write these crazy stories that have unlimited budgets and no one telling you what to do or not to do except for your fans, your customers. So philosophically, I kind of had to, I believe that one needs to get those kind of things sorted out. So I philosophically said, okay, this is what I want to create, and this is where I need to head to get to that place. So very specifically for you guys entering the ocean, got to really want to know, this is an exercise. Take this challenge. I've actually sat down with a young artist last week, and this was the challenge I put to her. To navigate the ocean, really get a real clear picture of where you are 5 years from now. That outcome, super clear, clearer than you're thinking about right now. Write it out, 5 pages, 10 pages. What does your day look like? Where are you waking up? Where do you live? What are you drinking? What are you working on? What's your output like? Be specific. This year, and let's see, we're here in 2020. In 2026, I'm going to put out 5 comic books, this, that, 7. Be specific and get super, super clear. Write that thing out. Put the most effort you've ever put into your life, ever, in visualizing what your life looks like, the way you want to see it 5 years from now. Do that. And then when you're done with that, head towards that. That's what you do.
Yeah.
I can't think of a better way to cap this off, Brian. So thank you very, very much. That was great. As usual, you end with a home run hit over the fence. Now, as I always guide the community, you are coming here. You're not getting paid. You're giving up your time, of which, your business is important to you. The way our community says thank you is, well, they can say thank you, but they also get to the comic shop and go pick something up. Sure. Whether or not they like something that you've put out, or they just want to buy it as a gift to someone else, what can they go to the comic shop and look for, or even go on Kickstarter and support right now?
Well, thanks for asking. First up, I'm just happy to do this. I just sort of think it's kind of part of the game. Giving back is kind of the name of the game. Impart what little I've learned and see if it has an impact. But yeah, if you're interested in more about what it is that we do, why don't you do this? Go over to coffincomics.com, go to the upper right-hand side of the corner and sign up to our mailing list. If you'd like, we do have our comics in comic shops across the globe. And we actually have a Kickstarter coming up. May 12th, we launched the 7th chapter of La Muerto. It is called La Muerto Onslaught. So any one of those things would be great, but at the very least, whatever comic you love, go buy a comic and turn one other human being who isn't into comics today into comics, so that we can keep our community growing at all times.
I love that, Brian. That is great advice. You can find us on Comic Book School at comicbookschool.com. On all social networks at Comic Book School. And of course, the questions that you saw tonight were from our Comic Book School forums in the create.comicbookschool.com forum. And we'll be continuing the conversation about Brian and the things that he brought up in our Comic Book School forums, which you'll see here. And then we'll also paste it in so it's easy to click on. Brian, one thing that I ask every guest, and that we're building a repository of, the final question I ask you is, what is one piece of advice you wish someone had given you when you were first breaking into comics?
Learn how to balance your checkbook. Just learn how to pay your taxes, balance your checkbook. A lot of folks in comics who offer their services work as independent contractors. And so let's say you're lucky enough to become an artist at Marvel or what have you, or even your own stuff. You really receive the full amount of the compensation. It's really up to you to pay your taxes. So I say, learn how to balance your checkbook. I know it sounds great. It's not sexy. Learn how to balance your checkbook and pay your quarterly taxes on time.
Brian, that is why we are about the craft and business of making comics. Everybody, a warm Comic Book School thank you to Brian Pulido. Thank you so much for coming on, Brian. We will see you at the live cons, and good luck on your next Kickstarter.
Thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate your time. Thanks to everybody who attended, and you guys are awesome. Have a great night.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, man. Peace out.